So many of you joined. Thanks so much for coming along. So as you can see from my title and no doubt the description that you read, this session is learning about what I'm calling the Agile inclusion paradox. We know that Agile actually aligns quite well with what is often talked about as best practices for inclusion. But at the same time, we also know tech isn't really well known as the best place for diversity. So what's going on? So I've carried out some research that I'd like to take you through and some of the lessons that we can learn about how we can actually build greater inclusion in our tech teams coming from the back of this research. So a little bit about me, you've heard lots of this already. So I'm a founder and director of a small social enterprise in the UK called Inclusioneering. We offer diversity and inclusion consultancy for tech and engineering firms. And I'm also a global lead for diversity and inclusion in a FTSE 100 tech firm. So that means it's like the the top firms within the stock market within the UK. So it's a large tech firm making industrial software. My background's actually as an engineer, software engineer myself. So I started off working in aerospace, making simulation software, and then kind of progressed into software for engineering more broadly, becoming a product manager and then leading some product development teams as a head of product. So I've been doing this for longer than I'd really care to admit, but for some reason I wrote it on my slide. But then I've had quite a pivot within my career. So in the last 3 years, I've changed from focusing on the technical aspects of tech and engineering to really focus on the human dimensions of it. And to support my work, I've retrained by taking a master's degree in organizational psychology. And actually, this is where the research that I've carried out that I'm going to tell you all about has come from. It was the dissertation project from my psychology degree. So I've put here as well, I'm also mum to 2 boys, Leon and Elliot. I'm hoping they don't come barging in during the session, but you never know. Leon has a broken arm, so there's some potential he comes in with some arm-related query at some point. So please forgive me if that does happen. I have to say their dad is on call to scoop up any children that come and interrupt. So fingers crossed we've managed to do this without the interruptions. But really, I mentioned them because becoming a mum was really key to my transition to be focused upon diversity and inclusion. And really, it was quite an awakening for me to realize actually my identity as a woman in tech did make a big difference. I spent 10 years previous in my career, very happy in my role, actually still very happy in my work, still love the field, and hadn't really seen why being a woman had any relevance at all, to be honest. But when I became a mum, I started to see how other people's assumptions and kind of expectations of me as a woman and me as a parent actually shaped what opportunities I had and the kind of work that I was getting to do. So that opened my eyes to the systemic nature, really, of bias and disparity and the need for much greater inclusion with our industry. And so it's really gone from there, broadening from gender to much wider topics of diversity. So before we go on, I've got to remind myself, I'm going to ask you all questions too to try to keep you involved and make this as interactive as possible. Would you all please tell me something about yourselves in the chat? So an example could be, what size of organization do you work for? Are you coming from a small organization, say less than 50 people, a medium-sized one up to a couple of hundred, or a big one larger than that? Or tell me something else that you'd like people to know about you. We've got a 300 from Kelly, medium from Catherine, medium from Amanda. Christine's big one, 500. Big, 200. Wow, great. Thank you all for all your answers. I can't keep up. This is superb. We've got some students, enterprises, large organizations, small firms. That's great. A great mix of people here. And, please share your experiences as we go on, and please keep interacting, because actually what we can learn from each other really makes our learning so much richer and brings so much more to what we're doing. So let me move on past me. So what I hope you're all here for today is to learn some new insights from the research about gender and race in tech teams. So for people coming for ourselves, we may just want to know more about how we can do better in our own careers, how can we get more traction. But actually there's also lessons within this research for allies and teams and organisations about how to support people within your sphere of influence from underrepresented groups in your tech teams. So I'd love to know what has brought you to this session today. Is it about yourself? Is it about being an ally? Is it about your team, about your organisation, or a mix of all these things? Or indeed something else? You're at the conference, it seems like a good one to drop in on. Okay, great. So we have an ally, we've got some all of the things. Yeah, lots of mixtures, all of them. Fantastic. Well, please hold me to account and ask me lots of questions when we get to the end and make sure we get what you're hoping for from this session. So before we dive in to the research, I'd like to talk to you about a friend of mine who really, for me, represents an awful lot of the things that I see happening within tech teams. So her name's Janaz. She was a real, I guess, studious teenager, went to uni and studied a maths master's degree, good university in the UK. And after university, she became a software developer, and she gained some good software skills, and her aspiration was to go up in the ranks within her software team and to eventually work towards becoming a software architect, where she was really demonstrating and kind of achieving technical leadership. So a couple of years into her career, she took her first job move from her first company, and she joined a new company. We'll keep them anonymous, so let's just call them Fubar Solutions, and she became part of an Agile development team. So Janaz still had her ambitions at this point. I really want to be an architect and really develop my technical strengths within this team. What she found that the team had a certain dynamic, as all teams do, and Janaz, very conscious of the people around her, made sure that she was playing nicely with the team and fitted her strengths around the strengths that she saw the other team members had. But what this turned out to mean was that she found herself doing more and more of the kind of people organizing tasks within the team. And the kind of the technical roles that she'd been looking to have somehow kind of took second place to some of the more people-y oriented kind of team organization stuff that she found herself doing. And the team complimented her for it. And she was quite proud, actually, that she was doing something that was valuable to the team. And actually, soon she was offered a role as a project manager. So kind of wind on about 3 years to now, and Janaz is kind of thinking, do I actually want to be doing this? It's my ambition is still there. I still wanted to be like really technical and to be showing technical leadership. But as I see Kelly has said, I'm busy doing the glue work. I'm holding it together. It's like, what do I do next? What's my move, and how can I get back within a path that's really determined by me, and how do I reignite my career? So I'd like to know, and ZZ Pen, I see you've preempted my question. Is this something that you're familiar with? Do you relate to Janaz? So could she be you? Do you know people like her, or is this something that you've not come across before? I see some yeses, and I see some unsmileys. Yep, yes and yes, yes, it's familiar. Yeah, I'm going to save all of your comments, everyone. This is like such rich information for me as a researcher as well, to actually know that what Janaz has faced, and actually, to be honest, I relate to Janaz as well. It's actually something that's a real common situation for an awful lot of us. So I'd just like to zoom out a little bit and put some of this in context about what does this actually mean within the tech industry, and looking at this from the lenses of both gender and about race. So I'm based in the UK, but I've given some US figures here. But if you'd like to know any about the stats in the UK or some other countries, I've got some of these to hand as well. So within the United States, around about 25% of the IT kind of computing tech workforce are women, which is obviously not as many as women we have in the population. But what we also see is that women just don't progress within their careers at the same rate as men in the tech industry, and they don't stay within those careers at the same rate either. So when we come, rolling several years on in the organizational lifespan, actually we only get 5% of technical leaders actually being women. So we have, what I'm sure you've all heard referred to as the leaky pipeline within a career within an organization. So even though we have this lower percentage of women joining the tech workforce than, of course, exist within the population, even fewer actually manage to progress to the most senior levels in the organization. So actually we see a pretty similar story as far as racial and ethnic minorities go within the tech workforce as well. So within the US tech industry, the industry average is that about 32% of employees are an ethnic or racial minority in the US. However, in the United States population, actually, it's 40% of the population are actually not white. Now, we've got some missing people here. And actually, predominantly within the tech industry, that's Black people and people who are Latino and Hispanic backgrounds, who are the people who are really not being represented within the tech industry, within this gap that we see here. And all of these figures were before COVID. So we had some issues, and then along came COVID. So some research from midway through last year showed that women are actually picking up over 7, almost 8 more hours of unpaid childcare and other kind of domestic duties than men are. And students of colour have been disproportionately affected in household chores in a very similar way. So some research by McKinsey actually found that as the result of COVID, around about 13% of men are actually considering leaving the workforce altogether, but 23% of women were actually making that same consideration. So huge impacts on men and women, but especially so on women within the tech industry. So I'd like to zoom out again and talk a bit more about what this means. So we've seen the individual impact on Janaz and her career aspirations, and we've seen about the, the aggregate input of the, those numbers of representation within the tech industry. But the impacts actually felt far beyond just these individuals and these organizations. So globally, we're actually facing a digital skills shortage. There just aren't enough people with digital skills to fill the demand from jobs. And actually the acceleration in growth of these jobs is really huge, particularly because of digital transformation sweeping across pretty much all sectors of industry, particularly with Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and machine learning really having application across so many different areas. Now, this stat here is from the UK, but an Accenture report calculated that in the UK, 141.5 billion pounds of gross domestic product will be foregone if that gap isn't closed by 2028. So we can see that there's just this enormous economic impact of these digital skills just not being able to be filled. So of course, if we can tap a wider proportion of people across the population, there's some way to address the skills shortages. But it goes beyond this too, because it's not just about filling roles, it's about filling roles in a way that means that we're addressing the needs of society. And actually something that's really concerned me over the last few years is the increasing reports we see in the news of bias in automated decision making, particularly from artificial intelligence. So one that really caught my attention recently was drivers with, I believe it was Uber, were complaining that they were being denied work because the facial recognition system didn't work properly for dark-skinned people. And so especially in nighttime, actually the facial recognition did not see them. It didn't know that they were the person they claimed to be, and so it denied them the opportunity for the work that they were trying to get. So, for addressing all of these kinds of bias, actually, it's important not only for filling the roles, but to make sure that the needs of people across society are actually represented within the workforce, to make sure that these kind of issues are recognized and they're prioritized and that they are addressed before we keep releasing software that essentially sustains these systemic disadvantages. So that's why it matters. So I'm going to zoom back in again and take a look at what actually happens within tech teams. So how many of you are familiar with Agile practices? Would you be able to tell me, have you got much experience? Have you led a team? Are you in an Agile team, or is it something that you're new to? Lots of Agile, some learning now, lots of experience, little experience. No experience. Great. Familiar with Scrum. Yeah, Scrum most familiar to me as well. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So let me just give a bit of grounding to make sure we're all talking in similar terms about Agile. So I'm talking about Agile in the broadest sense, so no particular methodology here. So agility is defined as the ability of an organization to innovate, collaborate, and create value, dynamically adapting to change. So actually agility with this definition is something that's being adopted now beyond tech teams quite often. As I even in HR hear people talking about agility in HR, although I will confess I'm yet to see them actually managing to implement this. So it's an important concept for tech teams and for beyond. So Agile teams are typically characterized by valuing people and interactions above processes from the Agile Manifesto, and teams are empowered. It's really important that the Agile team itself has got all of the skills they need in the team, so they draw on different disciplines and they can self-organize to solve the challenges that are brought to the team. They make use of reflective practice, so very typical that the team will inspect what they're doing and adapt their practices from retrospectives, or plan, do, check, act is another way that this is described sometimes. And importantly, the opportunities within the team are discussed as a team collectively. So the work comes into the team as a whole, and then the team as a whole talk about it, work out what the tasks are, and distribute them amongst themselves. So within my master's degree, as you do, you just do an awful lot of reading of all kinds of things. And there was one book that I really just found very impactful and very useful. I do recommend it. It's called What Works by an author called Iris Bonnet, who's a professor at Harvard University. And actually, one thing that really stood out to me is in all of her descriptions of recommendations for organizations about how to build inclusion, an awful lot of it is very much like these Agile values and principles. So she talks about embedding inclusion within the organizational values, making sure that processes are transparent so people know what work is there and are inclusive in how it's distributed, and take time to reflect on what's working and make changes as necessary. So we've got this apparent alignment, but as we've just seen from the stats, we don't have this great outcome. We can see the pipeline leaks. So why do we have this pipeline problem? Why do we not have women and people in racial minorities more included and better able to progress? So first step in this was to look to see what the research that's already been done can tell us about. And actually what I found is that an awful lot of research about inclusion and the leaky pipeline is focused around what I call the big ticket career events. So when someone's looking for a job, they're going through the interview process or the CV selection, when their performance is being assessed, when they're having a pay increase. But actually these things don't happen all that often. This is maybe once a year, maybe once every couple of years that you find a new job, you get a promotion, hopefully annual pay increases. So what happens in between? Is there anything that we can observe in the everyday that maybe means we can interrupt this bias before we hit these big ticket events? So my next step on this was to understand some of the psychological factors within a team that might cause some disparity. So this is what I call the Agile inclusion paradox, that we have our Agile practice appearing to be aligned with our recommended best practices for inclusion. So here are those best practices again. But from the organizational psychology and some of the social psychology I was learning, actually there's a lot of psychological factors within a team that are going to get in the way. So first up, the basis of a lot of it is stereotyped expectations. We categorize people based upon their social groups, and gender and race are very typical social groups that people subconsciously categorize people to. And actually this is a normal process. We simplify the social world so that we're able to process and make quick decisions. But the problem, of course, comes in that people don't always meet expectations. Stereotypes are a generalization and not true for everybody. And they also align with relative status. So we have different status expectations of women as compared to men, as different races as compared to each other, as an example. And this can get baked into our expectations of those people and can actually influence the evaluations we make about how competent they are and how well we expect them to perform in different situations. So this is where bias and prejudice can come in. And this can be expressed overtly, but actually in my experience, an awful lot of it is expressed quite subtly in the form of microaggressions, where someone probably from a higher status group makes some kind of comment that essentially holds the other person in a lower status position. And they might even be well-meaning. So one that I hear young women often mention is, he said to me, I'm too pretty to be a software engineer, and I don't really know how I feel about that. And it can have that kind of effect that it's a bit confusing and it feels a bit insulting, but they kind of meant something good, and it's completely messes with your mind. Other examples would be, for a racial example, would be complimenting a Black person on how well they're speaking, which then has the subtle implication, well, I didn't expect that. So you can see that actually these compliments can actually be hiding a much darker kind of expectation that really isn't up to the level that somebody may actually be working at. So all of this can lead to uncertainty of someone's feelings of belonging, and it can also lead to what's called stereotype threat. So if somebody knows, for example, that there's a negative stereotype that someone might apply to them, it can really impact their confidence and kind of create fear that they might inadvertently reinforce that stereotype and then kind of undermine their own their own abilities, and also kind of create this negative impression that continues for their group. So it can impact people's motivations about what opportunities they go for and what kind of things are realistic to actually expect to be able to achieve. But this doesn't actually just impact the individuals. It's not just about how people feel about themselves, it's also about the group behaviors. So the group will tend to act to reinforce the expectations that people enter the team with. So if someone enters the team seen as being a great people organizer, they'll get given a job to organize people. Next sprint, oh, Jo did really well on this kind of people-y task, let's give her another one. And essentially over not very many sprints, actually these established norms become reinforced within the team and actually become constraints that prevent people from kind of moving laterally so easily. So I'm realizing how much I'm talking, and I'm going to have to speed up a little. So this led me anyway to my research question. I started thinking, is Agile enough to build inclusion? Well, actually, we already can see no. So instead, what factors actually are influencing this? Is there micro inequities in terms of what gets assigned? Are people getting various stereotypical tasks based on their demographic? Do we actually see different motivations within individuals? And actually, does all of this tell us anything about what we can do about it? So what I did was to launch an online survey. I called it the Agile Experiences Survey, and I was really quite neutral in terms of how I put it, so people didn't know it was about equality and inclusion, to encourage people to answer honestly without skewing the way that they were going to answer it. So this was for North American and European people who were in tech teams. It was all available online, and I recruited via social media predominantly. And I asked people questions about what type of tasks they got. So how technical was it? How user-centric was it? How important was it? So aligning with those kind of status and gender stereotypes. And then questions about their career aspirations and their job satisfaction. So I managed to get 124 people responding to it. As you can see, mostly white men, just over 50%, but a good proportion of women, and a reasonable number of people who were not white, although not enough to be able to analyse different race groups separately, unfortunately. So what did I find? Well, first up, and I'm sure will surprise almost none of you, women were found to have less technical tasks than men. So I also saw that people from racial minorities had lower job satisfaction, but no particular difference actually showed up in the types of jobs they had. And actually, one thing that this just smacks me in the face with is what I've written here in big, is that although there's the similar psychological mechanisms going on here about why these groups experience differently, they do not have the same experience as each other. We cannot treat each different demographic group or intersectionality as if everyone is the same. It's quite different experience for different people. But let me show you here the graphs of what it looked like. So you can see here the perceived technicality that people have of their jobs. Almost 45% of women said that their tasks were below average technicality, versus you can see almost all of the men said either average or above average technicality. By the way, for user centricity, if that's a word, everyone said that they have average or above average user centricity. So no one is less user centric than average, apparently. But I think that this is quite interesting result to see this put in a graph, even if intuitively many of us already knew this. So we can also see the job satisfaction scores, that white people have higher job satisfaction than people who are in a racial minority group. So I found it quite surprising, actually, that we didn't see any job satisfaction differences by gender, because we do know that people leave their jobs in a rate that's proportional to their job satisfaction. These things are correlated. So why is that? That's a bit strange. You know, could there be that there's some mediating factor that means actually women report their job satisfaction differently, or they're more likely to leave a job for apparently equal satisfaction? One thing that did stand out, though, was that people from racial minorities, do have a higher exit rate, and they do have that lower job satisfaction. And so this can be a reason here that explains that. Something that I didn't mention that was quite concerning, actually, was that it seems that the reasons people were giving for lower job satisfaction from racial minorities is they were reporting lower scores on the questions around kind of the autonomy they have and their ability to use their own methods in teams. And remember, this is in Agile teams. That's kind of a key principle, that we should be empowering people with those things. Now, one of the favorite kind of outcomes, I guess, of my research was when I looked at career aspirations. So, stood out loud and clear, people from racial minorities especially have got higher aspirations than white people. And in some domains, women have got higher aspirations than white men. Given the progression rates, this is unexpected. We see that people from racial minorities and women progress at lower rates, yet they actually have the highest career progression kind of aspirations. Sanjeet, yes, I did look at the intersectionality of gender and race when looking at this. So the research was able to pull that up. And in fact, this next graph, I think, will show some of this. So here we can see just the white versus non-white groups. But here I've combined them all, maybe a little small to see, but you can essentially look at this graph and see, well, white men have got the lowest career aspirations of everybody. Actually, ethnic minority women have got the highest aspirations when it comes to their professional education, and when it comes to leadership aspirations, the groups don't seem to have a difference with that intersectionality. Just white and everyone else higher is the summary of what I'd say this graph says. So I think this is very interesting, and also a little sad, that we have frustrated ambitions, essentially, that we can see here. And actually, perhaps this is part of the reason why we see people from racial minorities actually reporting that lower job satisfaction, because they're just not meeting those aspirations. So some research in the UK by the British Computer Society actually found that for the same job levels, people from racial minority backgrounds tend to actually have higher educational qualifications as well. So it's not even that they're aspiring to things they don't achieve. They do actually achieve the level of education, but it isn't translating into career progression. And actually, this just really echoes, what people often say, and other research that says, actually, we're having to work twice as hard to get equal or even half the recognition. So coming back to the women's technical tasks, or their lower technical tasks, it doesn't seem that women are necessarily having an issue with it, that their job satisfaction is not lower. But one thing that really stood out that concerned me here was that because I asked about task technicality and task importance, I could see actually the teams overall correlated more technical tasks with more important tasks. So does this mean something about the lower technical tasks being valued less highly that women are taking? So this all says to me, what we're looking at here isn't necessarily stuff about what's going on in an individual. Actually, this is about the value that's being placed on individuals by the teams and the organizations that they're in. Are we actually valuing the work that women do? Are we actually valuing the aspirations and the progression opportunities that we can give to our racial minority colleagues? Are we actually valuing the education that they're achieving? Oh, my slide has gone wrong. Let's build it here. So the implications of this. Agile does have some great qualities, without doubt. Agile is a good thing. And something else that I saw that I didn't really report here is that people in Agile teams versus the people who took it that shouldn't have done, that weren't actually in Agile teams and got screened out by my questions. The Agile teams were more satisfied. They did actually have higher job satisfaction. But we can see that women and racial minority team members have got different experiences from their white male counterparts. So we can see that Agile on its own is not enough to build inclusion and equality in the team, and we need to take conscious action to actually disrupt these patterns. So what are my recommendations? Well, first up, for individuals, it's really important that you own your own strengths and your values. You reflect on what's important to you and you stick to your guns. You carve out your path and you have confidence in yourself to stick to what you believe you want to be doing. And for organizations, this reinforces, other advice that's often there, which is to have a really structured and clear approach to career progression. So people are able to see what's expected of them and they are able to meet the requirements to actually bridge to the next level. Also important to look at the cultural factors that may be impacting people within teams, to do with the way that work is valued. But really my key recommendations come around the Agile team members and team leaders themselves. So despite everything we found here, Agile has got some really great hooks to build inclusion. That alignment that shows up in the Iris Bonnet book with what Agile does, I think is a real key to how we can do better. So when it comes to building inclusion, we can adopt an Agile mindset. We can think about it in a plan, do, check, act, inspect and adapt way. So apply the same principles of continuous improvement to the way that we approach inclusion in our teams. And we can make use of the Agile ceremonies that we have, where people actually come together to make decisions and to reflect, to consciously put inclusion into those processes. So lots of research kind of questions unconscious bias training, is it effective or not? But actually other research is pointing to kind of coaching being a much more effective way to actually lead to behavior change. And actually my belief is if we bring it in to where the work happens within the team and we coach through the way that things are done, just as an Agile coach already does in the team, we can ask powerful questions that change outcomes. So in a sprint planning, for example, who's being excluded or who isn't being heard in this meeting, and how can we change it? What patterns do we see emerging in the way that we do things? How can we do it differently to equalize opportunities across the team? How can we disrupt the silos that we're seeing formed? And so by this means, we can create greater opportunities within the team and show greater recognition for our diverse team members. But actually beyond that, this stuff is going to strengthen the team. This is going to be great for individuals, but actually it's also going to help the team by building greater resilience, because there's going to be a broader spread of people that can do the work. Will increase productivity and the team will be able to much better address the spread of challenges that they actually have to deal with, coming back to these for example, issues of bias within artificial intelligence or products just not designed to meet the needs of everybody who uses them. So I'd love to talk to you about this more. If you're interested to know more about any of my recommendations, please just book a chat with me. I'd love to know about what your challenges are and if there's anything that I can do to help or to just dig in a little bit more to this. So no obligations. Please just get in touch. I'd love to talk some more about it. So some summary here just to wrap up. We've seen that Agile values people, transparency and reflection, and that really aligns well with inclusive best practices. But on its own, it's just not enough. We've seen that women and racial minorities do actually have different experiences from their white male counterparts. But the good news is we can actually use the Agile mindset practices and ceremonies to provide hooks that mean we can actually consciously reflect upon and build greater inclusion and equality into our teams. So thank you all very much for coming. Lovely to chat with you all. Really great seeing all the chat happening in the background. Sorry I couldn't address it all as it came in. I'm going to look forward to reading what you've all said afterwards. And yeah, please do be in touch. I've got my contact details on screen. I'd really love to hear from you. So I think we have a couple of minutes. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, please go ahead. Oh, thank you all for the wonderful feedback. Just looking at what you're saying. Has anyone got anything that you would like to ask me before we have to close? Are there other practices that aren't agile that are more inclusive? I think lean has also got some good pointers to it. In my experience, we talk very well at the top level about what is great for diversity and inclusion, but when it comes to the team kind of level stuff, there's very little there that actually tells people what to do. So, you know, we kind of talk about the principles and it's kind of obvious to us as women or people of color or people from the LGBT community or whatever, what we need. But actually for people in the majority group who don't have those experiences, they don't really know how to talk about it. So I think actually some of the core skill set is really just good communication skills, active listening, you know, kind of learning that kind of coaching style to really help ask open questions, draw from people what they need, understand their perspective and try bring people together. So I think they're the core skills. You know, ultimately all of the structures we put in place has to be supported by people having those skills to really be able to relate to each other and build that one-to-one inclusion, you know, between team members, between managers and teammates, and so on. So yeah, I think there's top to bottom work that needs to be done in organizations and, you know, for us internally as individuals. All right, let me see. I'm just going to scroll back. Have I faced any backlash as I've taken on this journey? So yes, I have. People have been mixed about it. Some people have, well, people have been quite respectful about it, but there's definitely been backlash. And there's a whole group of white men who feel quite threatened by it. And sometimes they're honest enough to actually say that directly. You know, say, well, what about us? You know, us middle-aged white guys. You know, are we not going to get any opportunities anymore? And there's a definite challenge to having that conversation productively and, you know, try and bring them on board rather than kind of put up additional barriers. So that's been a particular challenge. I mean, honestly, in my career, I've faced a lot of, I guess, personal challenges as a woman in tech, you know, particularly after having kids, as I mentioned, that really opened my eyes to the type of challenges that people have. So yeah, I mean, a more personal range of stuff has happened as well. So any tips for bringing this info to our male managers? Tara, I'm happy to talk further. If you'd like to just get in touch, I'd be really happy to just talk that one through. I see Desiree is back, so I guess we're nearly at time as well.
Almost. I think we got time for at least one more question.
Ah, fantastic. So would communicating your feelings on the situation with higher up individuals be the way to address these issues? Joanna, yes, I'd say, yeah, actually, it's really important that you gain the buy-in from your leaders. I've seen interventions kind of fall flat because leaders haven't really supported it. You know, their support is absolutely essential, actually, to have meaningful change in an organization. And I'd also recommend, you know, talk to them about your feelings, share your story, you know, if you feel comfortable to do that. But if you have data, that's actually also really helpful, particularly in tech. The way that I got into the role that I'm in now really essentially was by kind of helping HR out by doing analysis of our workforce by gender, kind of way back in 2014 when I got started with all of this. Kind of went to our CTO and said, I really want to, you know, see this change. You know, what are we doing about it? And he said, oh, do you want to help, Joe? It's like, yes, actually, that sounds good. And you know, I'd kind of confessed that I'd been kind of trawling through our Outlook system to try and work out who might be a man and who might be a woman and work out what job level they're at. So he sort of took pity on me and said, okay, well, we'll just give you the database, Joe. You can report on it. You can actually do the statistics. And actually, that was a real turning point in the organization, is having the data that showed women get to this level in the organization on average. Actually, men get to this level, and it's higher than the level that women get to. And just being able to see that representation dropped off at the more senior levels, all kinds of stuff showed through the data that suddenly, at least for a technical audience, kind of made them believe it. It's like the culture feels nice to me, so I don't really quite get what you're talking about, but here's the data. And it was kind of an eye-opening moment, I think, for quite a few people when they first saw that.
All right. Well, Joe, I want to say thank you so much for speaking today. This was phenomenal, phenomenal talk. And I also want to thank everyone that's here, that joined us today. I just want to give you a little heads up that the next talks that we have are Design for AI. Why do you need creativity to design artificial intelligence products? A workshop for how to build a serverless backend with Firebase, and a few lightning talks, collaborate using data science notebooks, and how dev tools influence our engineering careers. Highly recommend checking those out. They'll be starting at 2:15. And I'd also like to recommend, there's on the left side of your screen, you'll see reception, stage, sections, and then networking. The networking tool is really cool. It basically allows you to kind of round robin, 3 minutes, chat with someone. It's only 3 minutes, which I like to say. It's a great time to chat with someone and then pop out. It's at random, and there's no pressure on that. Once again, I want to say thank you, Joe, and everyone that was here today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for coming, everyone. It's been great talking to you all.
Thanks, everyone. And Joe, that was great.
Ah, thank you.
I'm also excited that it's recorded. I definitely want to share it out.
Fantastic. Yeah. How long will it be available for?
I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to ask, but I believe it's going up on YouTube. We can get that confirmed, because this is definitely, especially for this month, it's a great talk to have. And my company is big on D&I, and I want to share this over and see their what they think about it.
Oh, fantastic. Please let me know when you do it. I'd love to know what the reaction is.
Yeah, of course.
Thank
All
you.
right. I'm going to head off. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.